How would you feel about a law that requires people over the age of 70 to pass a specialized driving test in order to continue driving? Here in Illinois, my grandpa had to do it every year after 75. I think older drivers definitely need to be retested and have restrictions put on their license as to driving at night, driving only within certain distances of the home, driving above certain speeds, etc., up to and including revocation if found to be impaired to significant degree. And I'm staring down 70 myself. In Japan, they have special decals that identify new drivers and the elderly, which I think is a good thing. If you see someone with an elderly tag, you might not assume that driver sees everything you do or reacts as quickly as you do. I had trouble getting my dad to quit driving because I knew he couldn't see. He couldn't tell me from my daughter from across the room. I called the DMV for suggestions and sent him a letter to come in for a vision test. He passed. He was in his 90s with cataracts and dementia. We had a lot of rancor over this issue and he ended up living with my brother whom he would actually listen to. And he quit driving. I'm an optometrist. You'd be surprised at how many patients come in and tell me they failed the DMV vision test, but the person passed them anyway. It's ridiculous. That's a great idea. I'm going to call my 68-year-old congressman and ask him to support such legislation. Edit. Most driving laws are passed by state legislators, who usually do drive themselves. Old retired guy here, 74 years old to be precise. I would accept such a test provided it was only to catch really age-related diseases, dementia, poor reflexes, etc. I live in a retirement community and most of the people who should not have a license have already given them up. The first day I was here I heard a conversation between two guys. Guy 1, I just turned 88 and turned in my driver's license. Guy 2, why would you do that? Guy 1, I don't want to spend the rest of my life in jail. I'm all for retesting people, however, I'm not sure what you mean by specialized. The requirements for good driving don't change with age, so it should be the same test. Ideally, we'd all be retested every 10 years or so until we hit 60, then we're retested every 5 years. However, older folks are a huge voting bloc and it's unlikely this would ever pass. I send patients for driver's evaluations if their ability to navigate through my office is concerningly questionable. Unaware drivers are just as dangerous as impaired drivers. I work with the olds for a living. The frequency that they casually drop my doctor told me I can't drive anymore, coupled with the fact that they drove to my office, is terrifying. One woman could barely walk, who also told me she couldn't see while I was demonstrating something to her, got in her car and drove away after her appointment. There's another man who constantly tells us he donated his car to someone who needed it but regrets it because he has to take the bus everywhere. The son told us they literally had to take it away because he kept driving on sidewalks and running lights, and he refused to stop driving after his license was suspended for drunk driving. I watched another woman just YOLO pull away from the curb as she was leaving, nearly causing a multi-car pile-up. One woman came in because she had head trauma from an accident she caused. She drove herself. Also I've also had my bumper smashed in by a patient just trying to park in the spot next to me. I get a full dose of their cognitive skills in my office. There are many times I'm pleasantly surprised at how sharp they still are, but more often than not I'm afraid for those who are sharing the road with them on their way home. While I agree they do deserve the dignity of having the same rights as everyone else, I do not believe that rights should supersede the safety of literally anyone else on the road with them. Let me say this about that. The neighbor I love is 93 and still driving. When she's up to it, she can barely see the on/off switch on her vacuum cleaner. Should she be driving? I want her to maintain independence, but at the same time, I don't think it's safe for her or others. Yet the DMV doesn't require her to take a vision exam or a competency test, and that's why adoption of self-driving cars is so important. It would provide so much more independence for the elderly and disabled. Perhaps even more importantly, it would save us from drunks and idiots who insist on texting while they drive. Please. My grandma is practically blind and went to take her driving vision test to renew her license. She failed, but the lady at the DMV felt bad, so she had her take it again and gave her hints so she could pass it. So now my practically blind grandma is out on the road still. It's for their safety as much as anyone else's. I'm so mad that the lady at the DMV was so irresponsible as to let her keep driving. All for it. When I was 14, my friend was coming to my house and he got killed by my next door neighbor who happened to be elderly. My friend was on his skateboard and he was just up the street from my house. From the position of his body and where elderly guy stopped his car, I could see he made a super sharp left turn that killed him and ran over my other friend. The other friend survived and recovered from his injuries, but my other friend not so lucky. Oh, and my granddad has Alzheimer's and frequently forgets where he is, and I think he still has his license, though my grandma finally took his keys. I'm an iDoc and I'd be all for it. Honestly, thank you for at least suggesting it. Elderly drivers are so rampant in FL that I'm literally scared to drive because one of them may kill me someday. One already disabled my mother for a number of years. Every day that I drive in this cesspool of dying people and insane millennials, I lose another piece of my soul. They're either trucks driving 150 miles per hour with one hand on the wheel while asleep eating a pub sub, or some old fart going 35 miles per hour in the left lane of I-75 with both blinkers on. People should have to retake the driver's test every 10 years if not 20. I've seen too many terrible drivers of all ages. Can we make everyone take it? Seriously, I see more horrible drivers in the commuting age bracket than in the retired age bracket. Deleted. We had a pretty solid test in Virginia. Had to take 6 weeks of driver's classroom training and then had to do several test drives with an instructor before we could get our actual license. The final approval is done by the training instructor, but you take the knowledge test at the DMV. My grandma rear-ended a line of stopped cars on the highway at full speed, no brakes, with my 5-year-old brother in the car because she thought she saw a deer on the side of the road. She's been in another, less serious wreck, and has come to a dead stop while on the highway because she forgot where she was going multiple times since then. My dad had to unplug her battery and tell her that her car doesn't work anymore so she would start asking for rides. I would love if they took age into account in some way. I'm not an expert on anything so I don't know how they would do it, so that families wouldn't have to be torn between treating their elders like a child or worrying if they're going to get a call from the hospital anytime they're behind the wheel. My fiance's brother was killed riding his motorcycle Sunday by a 91-year-old who pulled out in front of him. He left behind a wife and 3 children. He was one of the best guys I ever met. We are all devastated and it could have been prevented. That man had no business behind the wheel. I ride a motorcycle and almost got hit by an elderly woman going the wrong way down a one-way street a few months ago. I was honking and waving my hands and she was blissfully unaware of my existence. I managed to swerve off to the side with enough room to spare, but what if I had a bigger bike and wouldn't have been able to? We ended up going to the same place, and when I asked her if she knew she was going the wrong way and if she even saw me, she said, "Oh no dear, I was going the right way. You were just speeding." I was literally going less than 10 miles per hour because I was getting ready to turn, and even if I was, did she plan on just mowing me down? It's ridiculous that she was so oblivious to what actually happened and still got behind the wheel of a car and drove home. I'm so sorry for your loss, that's really terrible. I'm gonna drop my pegs for him tomorrow. Man, that's crazy. It's not even always old people. There are so many people that forget they are behind the wheel of a 2,000 pounds vehicle. Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to our channel. We have new videos every day. Here's a meme for you to enjoy. I'd be okay with it if over 70 drivers are statistically more likely to get into accidents. I live in a town that caters to older people, and watching them drive is painful. By them, I mean end of middle age and up. From going 30 km/h in a 70 km/h zone, to watching them stare out the side window while going through that same zone. They swerve from side to side. I refuse to go anywhere with my grandpa driving, as he is now a horrible driver and has nearly crashed the car multiple times, then blames it on other drivers. However, I won't say that only elderly people need to be tested. I would hate having to do so, but we all should be tested. Just last night, teenagers drove over a school's fence in a large truck. People saw them. Cops haven't caught them. Younger people speed more, usually 70 and a 50. In just today, I got stuck behind someone doing 20 km/h in a 50 zone, and then while I was going 60 km/h someone flew past me like I was standing still. The roads would be better if we were all retested, and in regards to my town, if cops would actually do their job. Going severely under the speed limit is dangerous just as speeding is. We need statistics to show us which demographics cause the most accidents over distance driven. If the over 70 leads in this, then yes. As an insurance professional, just because you have been doing something for a long time, does not mean you are good at IT. Drivers should be tested every 5 years, not just once you hit a certain age. Everyone should take a standardized road test every 5 years. I'm for it. The inability for old people to drive would result in them voting en masse for public transportation improvements. The inability of old people to drive would result in them voting en masse to restore their ability to drive, changing nothing. I think you just summed up US politics in one sentence. By the time the law was passed, self-driving cars will be available. Or how about you just have to do a refresher course every 10 years? There are a lot of people out there with fully functional senses that still need a reminder about the rules of the road. I'd be all for it if we can compensate them by providing transportation to those who can no longer drive for low cost. Self-driving cars may soon fit this position. They should make everyone take driver's ed classes every 10 years. It's ridiculous to think someone who passed driver's ed even 20 years ago knows all the new traffic laws and car technology. This has been tried, but the organizations like AARP are very powerful and shoot down this type of legislation. Old people vote. Brexit can attest to this. It's hard enough to book a driving test these days. It takes a good 4 months in the UK. This would worsen the situation. Based on the state of driving I see every day, everyone should have to pass a driver's test every 5 years. It won't happen. I'm assuming you're talking about the US. The DMV is a state-level agency, not federal, so if one state were to have that law, another state may not have it. 70 seems a little young these days. I have a neighbor that I fish with at least once a week. He drives his truck, towing a base boat, without issue, and he's 71 or maybe 72. Of course, maybe he's the exception. But I can see a test for people of a certain age. I'm just not sure what age I'd make the law. Maybe 75? My chick's 86-year-old grandmother drives, but she keeps it to daytime hours during clear weather and stays within about a 5-mile radius in our small town. Grocery store, pharmacy, post office, doctor appointments/vet visits, etc. She's not had an accident, but I could understand a driving test for her. Really though, her understanding her limitations keeps things safe for her and others. It's such an individual scenario, but I guess we'd have to draw a line somewhere. Over 70? My aunt started getting dementia at 58 and should have had her license taken then and there. Test us every 10 years or with referral from a doc. Perhaps this would be best applied to the overall population. Retest with license renewal every 10 to 20 years by default. Emo. Cop here. I can only speak from my experience, but I've dealt with many more crashes involving teens to 30s than elderly folks. Mostly because the younger folks are eyeballs, deep in their phones. Emo driving tests in the US need to be more difficult and have the driver face most every scenario with at least 2 versions of each. In addition, this should have to be renewed every like 5 or 10 years with your DL. I'm a fire engine driver in OC/L.A. in CA, and there are too many drivers, Garden Grove and Dietla, that don't know to pull over and just stop, or try and make their turn before we catch up. Car accidents are the leading fatality for a reason. Secret to old life like Japan? Better driving habits and rules. My father-in-law had some muscular degeneration for a few years before he passed away. He couldn't physically lift his feet to walk, and sitting wasn't much better. He ran a stop sign, and almost hit another car and a pedestrian with my wife in the car because he couldn't move his foot from the gas to the brake fast enough. She took his license out of his wallet and threw it in the fire when they got home. He was pissed for a long time, because in his head he was perfectly able to drive, and didn't even recall his near accident. I'd rather see mass adoption of autonomous vehicles that would give the elderly the freedom of transportation without the need for driving. I believe they would self-police themselves to autonomous vehicles over driving themselves. In my experience, it seems like everyone needs a refresher after, let's say, 10 years. One reason is traffic laws change without our knowledge, except for maybe an article on page 6 of the paper. For example, I just learned that in PA they passed a law in June 2016 that allows drivers to go through a red light that isn't changing. Also, it seems that everyone thinks that turn signals and speed limits are optional and the left lane is for going the same speed as everyone else.